welcome back in. Today we're discussing our Week 10 must-start defenses and kickers of the week. We're going to highlight some of our favorite streaming options at both positions. Let's go ahead and get right to it. We're going to start with our top 12 defenses of the week. The Houston Texans versus the Jaguars. Now, I want to start off by saying I don't think the Texans truly get near the credit they deserve for how good they have been this year. The Texans defense is currently the number one scoring defense, allowing just 15.1 points per game. They also rank first in yards allowed per game. They also have arguably the best pass rush duo. It's Danielle Hunter and Will Anderson Jr., who have combined for 10 sacks already this year. Their secondary is also elite with Derek Stingley Jr., Kamari Lassiter, Jalen Petrie, and Kalen Bullock holding down the back end. Sadly, their offense has been really, really bad this year, and it's really what's held this team back in general. But either way, the Texans get a great matchup this week against the Jaguars, who are going to be without Travis Hunter and possibly Brian Thomas Jr., who could have a high ankle sprain. Fire up the Texas defense with confidence this week. Keep moving over to the Seattle Seahawks. Seattle's DST continues to be one of the best fantasy defenses. They currently rank first in fantasy points per game, averaging 9.4, and they are also just 2 points behind the New England Patriots for the top scoring defense in the league right now. The Seahawks created pressure on 25% of dropbacks, which resulted in 27 sacks, ranking third highest. They've also been opportunistic, creating the 11th most turnovers. And now next up is a matchup against the Cardinals, who have looked significantly better with Jacoby Brissett under center, though it remains to be seen if he will stick at quarterback, because Jonathan Gannon recently spoke at saying that once Kyler Murray is healthy, that they are going to put him back at starter. So we'll have to see on that. But either way, the Cardinals will have the 12th most fantasy points to opposing defenses this year, and Seattle at home is definitely a defense that I want to bet on. Let's move over to our top streaming options of the week. These are defenses that are all rostered less than 50% of leagues. We're going to start with the Cleveland Browns. The Cleveland Browns defense has been very good this year, despite constantly being put in bad spots by their poor offense. The Browns will come off their bye and get a very good matchup against the Jets. The Jets have allowed 3.9 sacks per game, and over their last 3 games, have been even worse, allowing over 5 sacks per game. This sets up well for the Browns, who have racked up the 9th most sacks and creating pressure on 21% of dropbacks, which is top 11. The Jets have also turned the ball over 10 times through 8 games, which also ranks 10th highest. This game sets up well for Myles Garrett and the Browns defense to feast on an offense that has allowed the 6th most fantasy points opposing defense. Let's keep moving. Move over to the Carolina Panthers, only rostered in 3% of leagues. But it's going to be the second time this year we have turned to the Panthers. While they haven't been great this year, scoring 5.7 fantasy points per game, which ranks 19th, they do get one of the better matchups you could ask for against a Saints offense that has allowed the 4th most fantasy points opposing defenses. While the Saints defense has done a decent job protecting the quarterback for most of the year, we are starting to see some cracks starting to form here, because over their last 3 games, they have allowed 3.3 sacks per game, which is top 10. Then you factor in that rookie Tyler Shough being under center here, and you have the makings for a Panthers top 10 DST this week. And again, only rostered in 3% of leagues. Keep moving. Move over to the Buffalo Bills versus the Dolphins. The Bills have been ravaged by injury this year. It feels like every game they are losing a key part of that defense, but they continue to play pretty well, as they are averaging 6.3 fantasy points per game, which ranks top 15. They currently have the 8th most sacks. They also have created turnover on 11% of offensive drives faced so far this year. Next up for the Bills will be a matchup against the Dolphins, who have turned the ball over a league-leading 15 times through 9 games, which is one of the biggest reasons why they have allowed the 5th most fantasy points opposing defenses. Now, lastly, I got a bonus defense for you this week. Now this is going to be solely based on if CJ Stroud misses week 10 with a concussion that he suffered last week against the Broncos, because Davis Mills stepped in for him last week and looked, as you'd expect, absolutely dreadful. We talked a lot about how good this defense has been this year for the most part, but they did just get absolutely shredded by Brock Bowers and Geno Smith. However, Davis Mills is nowhere near as good as Geno Smith is. And so Davis Mills is a quarterback we want to attack. And so I do think this game is going to be very low scoring, very much like we saw last week against the Broncos and the Texans, where it was 18-15 type of game. So Jaguars, I think, are also in play if CJ Stroud were to miss. So let's keep moving here. Let's move over to our streaming kickers of the week. And we're going to start with Will the Thrill Reichard against the Ravens. Reichard is only rostered in 16% of leagues, and he continues to put together a solid season. After many were wondering if he would even make it all year as the starter, he's converted 88.9% of his field goals, has converted the 2nd most field goals of 50-plus yards. Reichard has now put up 2 top 5 weeks over his last 3 games, and he looks to keep that streak going against the Ravens. This game is a very healthy 48-point total. and is one of the highest totals on the slate. And Reichard gets a great matchup against a Ravens defense that has allowed the most fantasy points to opposing kickers. Keep moving here. Let's move over to Cairo Santos, roster 19% of leagues. Santos has been on a roll lately, putting up 3 straight weeks of top 12 production while averaging 13 fantasy points per game over that span. Santos has already converted 6 field goals of 40 or 50 plus yards, and he's only played in 6 games so far. Next up for Santos is a matchup against the Giants, who have allowed the 4th most fantasy points to kickers this year. Lastly, this game has the 5th highest total of the weekend, making Santos a very strong streaming option this week. Next up, let's talk about Chad Ryland, rostered in 5% of leagues. Ryland was on this video last week. He's going to make another appearance this week. Ryland converted 2 field goals and all 3 of his extra points against the Cowboys for 10 fantasy points, which ranks top 9. Ryland on the season is averaging 9.4 fantasy points per game, which currently ranks top 10. It's also been pretty useful that Ryland has converted 9 field goals of 40 and 50 plus yards through 8 games. Next up for Ryland is a road matchup against a very bend but don't break Seahawks defense. The last time these 2 teams faced, Ryland scored 10 fantasy points and was the kicker 9 on the week. I have no problem projecting him as another top 12 kicker as well this week. Now, lastly, I did want to mention Cam Little because I talked about how low scoring that game is going to be. I think Cam Little is going to be in play. I think very much so. This could be a game of field goals. Who has the most at the end, I think could win because Kyrie Fairbairn and Cam Little are both very solid plays this week against the Texans, Jaguars, and Doors. But Cam Little, we already know this dude has a monster leg, set the NFL record last week with a 68-yard field goal. Monster leg here, but Cam Little I also think is in play in what should be a very, very low-scoring game between these 2 offenses if C.J. Stroud were to miss. So just want to mention Cam Little there as a bonus kicker. So with that being said, be sure to hit the like, hit the subscribe. If you have any questions, leave them in the comments section below. We'll help you out. We'll see you on the next one.